very excited to have our day kicked off by Brock Jolly, which I will formally introduce here in a second. But I just wanted to kind of note on a few housekeeping items. Everyone participating is in listen-only mode. I encourage you to ask questions through the chat or Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. We like to keep these sessions interactive, and I know that we've allocated some time at the end to make sure that we get all of your questions answered and addressed. In addition, we're going to be sharing a survey. We really appreciate you taking a quick moment to complete that. The feedback is imperative to how we mold our future content, and really appreciate the information. So a little bit about Brock Jolly, who's going to be talking to us today about retirement and college planning and how we can organize it to make sure that people are comfortable doing both. Brock Jolly is a financial advisor with Veritas Financial and the founder of the College Funding Coach, a nationally recognized company that helps parents save and pay for college without jeopardizing their retirement. A sought-after financial advisor and student of the industry, Brock has deep knowledge and resources in all aspects of financial planning. Brock is the current national treasurer of NAFA. In 2011, he was named NAFA Young Advisor of the Year, and in 2015 was awarded the Legacy Award by the Washington, D.C. Helping Hand Society. A graduate of University of Virginia, Brock has been featured in numerous media outlets, including the Wall Street Journal, CNBC, PBS, the Motley Fool, which is a new one for me, and Investment News. Lives in Arlington with his wife, Lauren, and two beautiful children. And he's an avid hockey player. And for anyone on this call that is active on Peloton, which I'm active, not as active as he is, but he is the guy who wins. So when you log in to do a 30-minute class or a 45-minute class, I can tell you, you're like, who's the person that's like in the top 5 that's blowing out the stats? Brock Jolly. So pay attention to his name, not just in financial service publications, but on Peloton leaderboards. So Brock, we're excited to have you. Look forward to sharing your insight. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, and you can get started.
As Brian said, my name is Brock Jolly. Excited to be here with you today. First things first, I just think, what we've experienced the last 2 days with this Impact Week event has been awesome. Just presentation after presentation with really good, valuable information. We just did a call a little bit ago with the speakers for today. And I'll tell you, you've got, maybe myself excluded, you've got some really, really good stuff coming today. So thank you to all of you who are here, who continue to make these type of events a success. And on behalf of the NAFA board and everyone on the staff, really appreciate all you guys continue to do for NAFA, for the industry, et cetera. So what we're going to talk about today is, I called this Little Known Secrets of Paying for College Advisor Edition. So as Brian mentioned, I started this organization called the College Funding Coach, gosh, about 19 years ago. And kind of fell into it. It was really by default more than it was by design. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it and maybe give you a little bit of a peek behind the curtains on just some of the things that we're doing with clients. Because the thing I've come to understand is that college funding is one of the top financial fears of most American families. But the problem is that most advisors don't focus on it. And we'll talk about that a little bit here as we go along. So a little bit of today's agenda. We want to talk about life as a new advisor. And I think whether you are 50 years in the business or 50 minutes in the business, you can probably identify with some of these concerns. I'll talk a little bit about college funding, some of the basics that's important for you to know, some of the strategies that we're using every day with families to not only save, but also to pay. There's some differences there for college. We want to talk about the expected family contribution calculation, strategies for if a family can maximize need-based aid, how to do that, how to create liquidity and cash flow, and then certainly not least is talking about some of the behaviors that we would obviously encourage you to avoid. I will see, and I see some of it popping up there. Please feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat. I'll do my best to monitor that. I know that Zach and Brendan and Brian are also monitoring that behind the scenes. So big thank you to those guys. And let's get it rolling. My goal today is just to give you lots of information. I say all the time, any great ideas I have are usually because I've stolen them from somebody else. So, if you've got any questions, again, please put it in the chat and I'll do my best to get them answered. All right. So let's talk about life as a new advisor. For some of you, this may be very recent. For some of you, you may need to remember back a number of years. But my observation of the industry is the inherent problem is that they bring a new advisor in and they say, okay, go be the CEO, the CFO, the sales manager, the secretary, the director of marketing, the IT director, janitor, chief cook and bottle washer, et cetera, and give very little training or support to help you in that regard. And so you end up looking a little bit like this guy on the screen. And you do that over and over and over and over again. And our industry sits there and we scratch our head and say, I wonder why close to 90% of the people who get into this industry fail out in the first 4 years. Now, I know I'm speaking to a lot of people on this call who have had significant success. Maybe I'm talking to some people who are starting to get some traction. But I think the key is our industry really isn't very good at figuring out, especially the marketing angle, right? How do you get in front of people on a regular and consistent basis? Now, I know later on today, I believe at 3 o'clock, Brad Swinehart from White Glove is talking. They've got some great strategies for how you might be able to create some turnkey marketing strategies, right? However, look, we all could be better at prospecting, right? And whether you're doing that through organic prospecting or you use a lead generation service, somehow, some way, the name of the game is you got to get in front of people on a regular and consistent basis. And the problem with sort of this model as it exists is I always say it's sort of like this, right? Just every day, over and over and over and over again, we're all getting beat down like that penguin, getting knocked into the water. Well, only the strong survive. And so it takes a lot of resilience to keep coming back when people keep saying no. And so it leads to sort of how I got into this and why college funding. I mentioned earlier that both Gallup and Fidelity have done studies in the last couple of years that say that college funding is the #1 financial fear of most American families. But the problem is that less than 3% of financial advisors truly focus on it. And so for us, it's really been sort of, I call it the blue ocean strategy, right? Parents are scared to death about how they're going to save and pay for their kids' college education and still retire one day. And so again, this was not by design. It was sort of by default. We said, hey, that's going to be my market. And I started doing it in the Washington, D.C. area. We were teaching in one county, and then pretty soon one county became 5. And I spoke at an event sort of similar to this. And I had a guy up in Philadelphia who said, can we sort of replicate what you're doing? And we were in Philadelphia and Richmond, sort of up and down the East Coast. We've now built this to where we've got almost 100 advisors around the country who are using our program essentially as the door opener to be able to do comprehensive financial planning. The other real big epiphany for me is that I figured out 2 things. I said earlier, most financial advisors don't focus on this stuff, and parents are scared about it. But the other thing I figured out is that for most families, and think about your clients, where's their money? Well, for most families, their money is in the equity in their homes and in their retirement plans, which is great for retirement. It's not necessarily great when you need to save or pay for your children's college education. And what we've also found is that if you can solve this problem, you've got a great opportunity to be able to solve the problem around everything else: retirement planning, risk management, investing, etc. For most families, I saw this commercial a few years ago and I said, you know what? This is exactly what it's like for most of our families. So tell me if this is anything you've ever seen before.
I got into one of the best schools in the country. I got into one of the most expensive schools in the country.
When stress gives you heartburn with headache, Alka-Seltzer gives you relief fast. Plop, plop, fizz, fizz.
So just in case the audio wasn't working on your end, girl runs in, says to her mom, I got into one of the best schools in the country. And his dad's sort of choking down his submarine sandwich. He hears, I got into one of the most expensive schools in the country. And then the Alka-Seltzer gives you relief, plop, plop, fizz, fizz. And I've found that that's what it's like for most of our families. I mean, many of you are parents, right? Think about your own kids. We want our kids to go to great schools. We absolutely want to make sure that our kids don't live in our basements for the rest of their lives. But those great schools are expensive. And so how do we do it? And I always say college funding really is a retirement funding issue. In other words, if you didn't, or if your clients didn't have to pay for college, think of all that additional money that they could have at retirement and vice versa, right? And so they're really attached at the hip. And so if you're talking to families about retirement planning, but they also need and want to send their kids to college, you've got to be addressing both. So let's talk a little bit about the costs. Well, the average cost of attendance for a student today for an in-state public school, we're talking about just under $27,000 per year. For a private school, it's roughly double that. And for the elite and the Ivy League schools, $75,000 on up, right? There are a handful of schools now that are over $80,000 per year, right? So think about that. That's over $300,000 per child that a family might be paying for college education. Now, here's the big variable. That assumes, number one, that the costs don't go up during their years in college. That's pretty rare. And number two, that the child graduates in 4 years. Well, I'll give you the punchline and tell you that the average student takes about 5.6 years. And so you've got to really be thinking about this math and how it works and the impact on the overall financial plan. And the reality is it's not getting any less expensive. Now, this is kind of a nerdy slide that I don't share all the time, but I think it just gives you an interesting peek behind the curtain and allows you to have some intelligent conversation with your clients. So this is, and I've got the website there. Every month, Advisor Perspectives updates this. But I'll just point out two numbers to you. On the left-hand side, it looks at CPI since January of 2000. So just over 20 years. Right? CPI, meaning basically inflation, right? How has the cost of goods increased over that time period? CPI has gone up about 56%. Now train your eyes on the right-hand side and you'll look at college tuition and fees, which has gone up nearly 170%. What that means is over that same time period, the cost of college has gone up nearly triple the rate of inflation. I could do a whole 45-minute presentation just on the economics behind it. I was trading emails with somebody the other day about, some of it is just as interest rates have come down, as the demand for college has gone up, as the stock market's done well. The federal government is to blame a little bit for this as well, right? Because they are the number one lender out there. And so think about it. They're the benefactors of people repaying student loans to cover the gap on college education. So how are you going to pay for it? Well, again, I could probably do a whole 45-minute presentation on this. My assumption is that most of you understand the pros and cons of all of these. But what I'll tell you is the question I get from families all the time is, well, which one's the best? And my answer is, look, there are advantages and disadvantages to every single financial instrument, right? I mean, you could take UGMAs and UTMAs. The advantage, lots of flexibility. Disadvantages, they're taxable. They count as a child's asset, which counts at a higher rate than mom and dad's rate. And the big one is when the child turns 18, that's their money. And so if the kid wants to go, move out to LA and start a rock and roll band, that's their money. Now, the good news is that most 18-year-olds don't know that. So things to think about. I mean, we're having a lot of success right now talking to families or talking to employers about Section 127 employer assistance programs. So it used to be that an employer could set aside $5,250 per employee, either as student loan reimbursement, tuition reimbursement, or to put towards a Section 529 plan. But it was taxable. It was tax deductible to the employer. It was taxable to the employee. Well, as part of the CARES Act in 2020, it made it so that those payments are now tax-free to the employee. So the employer can deduct it, the employee can receive it tax-free. So if you're working with any business owners, great little strategy. If they've got employees that they really want to take care of, it's fully discretionary, it's discriminable. You can sort of pick and choose who gets it and who doesn't get it. Again, lots more here. I could dive into this. If anybody wants a more full description, take a look at our website. I go through this when we do our presentations to families. We do about 400 of these presentations across the country every year. Obviously, Section 529 plans are sort of the hot button. We're going to talk as we go through this presentation a lot about the pros and cons. What I would tell you, though, is this. Most people these days know about Section 529 plans. What I would warn you is a 529 plan is a wonderful tool, but it's not necessarily a strategy. Just think back not too long ago. Think about 2008 when the stock market was down about 37%. There were still some children who had the nerve to say, Mom and Dad, I still want to go to college. Even though your 529 plan is down by nearly 40% in some cases, yeah, I still think getting an education makes some sense for me. I say that kind of in jest, but the idea is just understand the advantages and the disadvantages of all these financial instruments. And coming back to my original point, there is no one silver bullet here. The key is planning comprehensively, helping families understand their situation and crafting a solution that's going to work really well based upon their situation. But my question for you is, what is the best way to pay for a college education? And we'll fire up the chat box here a little bit. Who can answer that question? What's the best way to pay for a college education? All right, I'll cut to the chase. I call it OPM, right? Other people's money. Thanks, Brian. What I mean by that is every single college and university has an endowment, right? The endowment is money that they use to build buildings, to endow professorships, and most importantly for your clients, to attract and retain really talented students. So at the top of this list, upper left-hand corner, you get a little tiny school up near Boston called Harvard. Harvard, actually now they have over $40 billion in their endowment. Now think about that for a second. With that kind of money, Harvard could cover the cost of attendance for every single one of their students in perpetuity. Yet Harvard charges about $75,000 per year. My question for you is why? And again, the short answer on that is because they can. Because Harvard knows that they've got that brand name. And there are plenty of families out there who will gladly pay $75,000 a year in order to get that crimson bumper sticker on the back of the Honda Odyssey. And look, if you'll pay $75,000 a year for that crimson bumper sticker, Harvard's got a spot for you, right? If you can get accepted and you're willing to pay, they've got a spot for you. Right? But they also realize that there's lots of families who have the brains to get accepted at a school like Harvard or some of these others, Yale, Princeton, Dartmouth, Stanford, others. If you've got the brains, but you don't have the bucks, the dollars to be able to pay for it, Harvard says, we've got $39 billion in an endowment. Add to that some big state schools like the University of Texas, University of Virginia, Penn State, Michigan, some others, right? I always stop in the upper right-hand corner. I grew up in Indiana. And in Indiana, there's a little tiny school called Indiana University. Indiana's got about $2.5 billion in their endowment. Now, just behind them is a little tiny school, literally little tiny school in the middle of nowhere in the middle of Iowa called Grinnell College. Now, unless you live in Iowa, you've probably never heard of Grinnell College, right? There's a great book called Colleges That Change Lives by a gentleman by the name of Lauren Pope. And he talks about these 40 liberal arts schools that are a little bit off the beaten path, but very, very well respected. The other reason that some people may know of Grinnell College is that there was a guy on the board of directors for a number of years by the name of Warren Buffett, right? Suffice it to say that Grinnell is really well managed from a financial perspective. I'd like to compare it maybe a little bit towards NAFA's finances that are tremendously well managed as well. But here's the point. Grinnell has about $2 billion in their endowment. Here's the big difference. Indiana University has about 43,000 students. Grinnell, by comparison, has this year 1,734 students. Do you think you can stretch roughly $2 billion more among 43,000 students or 1,700 students? My point is not to make a public service announcement for Grinnell. My point is to say Grinnell's the type of school that has money and that gives money. So if you're working with families who are eligible for aid, whether that is need-based aid or merit-based aid, you want to make sure that you're looking at schools that have money and that give money. And we work with families every single year where they've eliminated their leverage, right? Because they say, look, I want my kid to go to this school, or my kid wants to go to this school, but that school's not going to give them any money. If they want or need financial aid, again, whether that's need-based or merit-based, it's important to draw the line in the sand early and understand the process. So let's talk about the process. Most of you have probably heard of the Fafsa, Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Every single college or university requires the Fafsa. They're going to look at four things. They're going to look at parents' income, parents' assets, students' income, and students' assets. And there's a whole algorithm that I'll walk you through here in a second. But they're going to look at all of that. And they're going to say, here's what we expect your family to pay. It's what's called the expected family contribution. I'll talk more about that in a second. There are also a number of schools, to get a little nerdy and tell you exactly, there's 179 currently that use a form called the CSS profile. CSS just dives a little bit deeper, right? They may ask about things like money that you have inside of retirement plans. They might talk about home equity that you have. They might talk about cash value that you have inside of life insurance and annuities. They might ask about the non-custodial parent, right? And every school is different. There's actually a pool of about 700 questions. Each school is allowed to ask 10 questions. And then finally, there's about 38 schools that use a form called the consensus expected family contribution. So we don't need to dive into the details on that now, but what I would tell you is as your families with whom you're working are getting closer and closer to go off to send their kids off to college, you want to have a good handle on what type of schools they're considering. If the school uses the CSS profile or the consensus EFC, you want to understand what questions those forms are asking that family might be asked, right? Sometimes you got to dig a little bit deeper on that. The CSS profile is especially a little bit of a black box. But we talked early on about cost of attendance. I just mentioned this term, expected family contribution. Well, cost of attendance minus the expected family contribution is your family's financial need. Okay, said another way, here on the right-hand side of the screen, financial aid is the amount of aid for which your family is eligible. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the amount that you're going to get. That's your line in the sand. What I would encourage you to do is to calculate your expected family contribution that's going to apply to the family with whom you're working. It's also important that you understand that some things count and some things don't count. So on the left-hand side of the screen are all the things that count. On the right-hand side are all the things that don't. Okay, couple that always jump out to people in terms of assessable assets. The one that always jumps out is the current retirement plan deferrals. So if you've got a family that's putting $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 a year into the retirement plan, it comes back into the equation. By the same token, at most schools, FAFSA schools, they don't count money that is already in your retirement plan. So you could have a family that's got $1 million inside of a retirement plan. It's not going to count at most schools. Again, most schools don't count equity in your primary residence. They don't count cash value that you have inside of life insurance or annuities, household items like paintings, baseball card collections, automobiles, etc. But by the same token, personal debt doesn't count. The one warning I would give you is there's a lot of folks out there in our industry who will say, you know, Mr. or Mrs. Client, you need to put all of your money into life insurance, annuities, and other non-assessable assets so that you can reduce the expected family contribution. I would just say be really careful, because the problem is you've got to draw that line in the sand. The biggest driver in the financial aid formula is your income. We have families who come to us all the time who say, hey, my advisor told me I needed to shift the assets here because it's going to lower my expected family contribution. Well, it might lower your expected family contribution, but if your starting point is that you're earning $250,000 a year, guess what? The likelihood is that you're not going to qualify for need-based aid regardless of how much we shift the assets. So just, be ethical, do things the right way, be legal, moral, ethical, et cetera, as you're doing these things. Okay. What I would encourage you to do with families is to calculate their expected family contribution. Now, I'm a little bit biased, but I would tell you we spent a lot of time, a lot of effort, and frankly, a lot of money developing what I think is the best calculator out there in the industry. Because what our expected family contribution calculator does is it calculates all three methodologies. There are some that do just the Fafsa, others that do the Fafsa and the CSS profile. Ours actually adds to that by doing the consensus methodology. And it'll give you all three numbers so that these families understand what it is. And so you can go to our website. There's two different spots you can look. Right there on the homepage, there's a gold box that says EFC calculator. You can also go under the tab that says Get Help. Under Get Help, there's actually a lot of calculators. We pay for all of them. Use them, right? I mean, they're there. We don't track any of it. It's just, some nice, easy calculators that people can use to sort of do a gap analysis, to look at 529s, compare and contrast in-state versus out-of-state, but also the EFC calculator is there. This is also a nice, good way to cover up my face on the website. So use it. Put in fake numbers, put in fake names. I mean, look at it, say, hey, what if we were to shift assets? How would that impact the EFC calculation, et cetera? Let us know. Oops. Somehow this says my screen sharing is paused. Brian, do you see that? I'm gonna.
I don't necessarily. No, I just the PowerPoint came down. Now it's just your pretty mug.
Brock, we can see you just fine, but if you're able to share your PowerPoint instead of your entire desktop, that would be helpful.
Can you see it now?
You're all set. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, guys. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the EFC estimate. This is just a real quick version. So you do your own expected family contribution with these families. I want you to understand that the biggest driver in the formula is the income. So what we're showing here is just simply as the adjusted gross income increases, you can see here, $100 to $175 to $250,000. Look at the red numbers, right? You see it going up significantly as the income increases. Okay, now everything else is the same. Family of 4, 50-year-old older spouse. Okay, now understand also that in 2023, this formula is changing. Right now, they take the expected family contribution and they divide that by the number of students in school simultaneously. And so, as an example, if you had a family of 4 and 2 kids are in school, they're going to divide the EFC by the number of kids in school simultaneously. Just announced a couple of months ago, they're no longer doing that. So families who have twins, families who will have multiple kids in school simultaneously, feel like they've gotten a little bit of a stiff arm from the college funding gods on this. And so just be aware of it. Have intelligent conversations with your clients. Again, if you want more information, we've got a great blog on our website from Angelique, who's one of our advisors, that talks about these changes. A guy by the name of Mark Kantrowitz wrote a great article in Forbes that talks all about it. There's lots of information out there. I'd encourage you to be aware of it as you're talking with clients about some of these changes. So then the question becomes, okay, Brock, that's all fine and well, but look, most of my clients aren't going to qualify for need-based aid, right? I work in a more affluent market, and they want to figure out how to create good strategies. I said at the beginning of this that most families have their money in 2 places: the equity in their homes and in their retirement plans. So let's take a look at, instead of qualifying for OPM, other people's money, let's look at how families might qualify or just how to use their money more efficiently, more effectively. Number one, are they carrying a lot of non-deductible debt? I'll just give you a quick example. We had a family a few years ago. They came to us, retirement looked great. College, not so much. They had been saving and saving and saving, just putting aside money. Both husband and wife were maxing out 401k contributions, but they had about $35,000 of credit card debt. It was at an interest rate of nearly 17%. And I said, look, you're not earning 17% on your retirement plans. So I'm going to give you the advice that most advisors wouldn't give you. And that is, stop funding your 401k contributions over and above the match, right? So putting it up to the match, that's free money. That's OPM. But with the money that you're putting in over and above, we're going to start redeploying that towards the 401ks. Sorry, I said that wrong. Towards the credit cards. Once the credit cards are paid off, which for them, it was a little over a year and a half, they actually got all that credit card debt paid off because they were focused on it. Then what we did is we had a conversation to say, okay, do we now put that towards the 401ks again, or do we start building up an asset that we could utilize for college or retirement? And that's what we ended up doing. But things to think about. Can they increase their cash flow? I'm going to give you an example of that in just a minute. What role do taxes play on your clients' investments? Most clients they're aware of taxes, but they don't understand the impact of taxes or fees. I say all the time, money is not math and math is not money. Clients don't understand a lot of times that inside of their non-qualified investments, they're paying taxes every year, right? Sometimes they're paying taxes even if the account value goes down. They don't understand that a 401k or a 403b or a thrift savings plan or an IRA is tax deferred, right? Explaining this to them and being able to take a comprehensive view of how their money works, to be able to say, if you want to be able to save and pay for your child or your children's college education and still retire, you've got to take a comprehensive look at this. Because college is so expensive, you've got to plan comprehensively. And then last one here is with business owners. If you're working with business owners, why not hire their kids in the business? Now, a lot of times their kids are already working in the business, and mom and dad have the mindset of, my kids are going to work in the business, but I want to teach them work ethic. I want to teach them the importance of having some skin in the game and being part of the family business that perhaps they're eventually going to inherit one day. Don't disagree with the mindset and the parenting philosophy. What I do think is a great strategy is to hire the kids in the business and shift income from mom and dad's maybe 40% tax bracket to the child's maybe 0% tax bracket, right? We did that for a family a few years ago. We put $15,000 a year that got paid to the two oldest children. So basically they were spending $30,000 a year. Did that for 4 years of high school and 4 years of college, right? So 8 years, they shifted $30,000 a year. They were in the 40% tax bracket, just for round numbers. So they saved $12,000 per year on their federal taxes. Again, did that for 8 years. They legally, morally, and ethically saved $96,000 over that 8-year period that they did not have to send to the Internal Revenue Service. Now, in their situation, that basically paid for one of those two boys' college educations, right? The boys were already working in the business. They just shifted it from mom and dad's high income tax bracket to the child's low income tax bracket. And then the last one is simply taking advantage of the current low interest rate environment, right? Now, for some of your clients, this might scare them to death, right? But for a lot of families, we're getting the question all the time. I've got the money set aside for college, but I can go borrow the money at 3.5%, and I think I can earn better than that. Now, for some of your clients, again, that's going to scare them to death. But if they've got the risk tolerance and the appetite for that, it may make a lot of sense. Again, a lot of variables in that. I'm kind of skimming over it, but just something to be aware of. My question, and what we're going to wrap up on today before I give you a sales idea, is where do most people have most of their money? And it's right back where we started. And that is for most clients, they're putting their money in two places. Now, when I do these presentations live in front of 300-person auditorium or something, I ask all the audience to stand up. And I say, at this point in the presentation, I always want them to stretch their legs a little bit. But think about it. Think about your situation. Think about what your clients are doing. Where's their money? Here's how I present it to people, right? You're making monthly contributions. All deposits are not safe from loss of principal. The customer can pay more than the minimum monthly payment, but not less. If the customer attempts to pay less, the financial institution keeps all previous contributions. If the customer misses a monthly payment, it negatively impacts their credit score. Each contribution is illiquid and results in less safety and increased tax liability. And then last but not least, the money in the account earns a whopping 0% rate of return. Now, if I'm presenting to an audience with 300, 400 parents in it, inevitably there's maybe one or two parents who are still standing up, but the majority of the time, everybody's sitting down, right? Nobody wants to invest in that thing. But you've probably connected the dots because you understand this stuff to understand what we're talking about here, right? What is that investment? Well, that's your home, that's your mortgage, or more specifically, it's paying extra principal against your mortgage. We've all seen it. Families or individuals want to own their home free and clear. Certainly a worthwhile objective. I'm not here to say that that's a bad objective. In fact, I would tell you it's probably a good objective. But I asked earlier, could families increase their cash flow? And I said a lot of times it's right under their nose and they don't realize it. This is a great example, right? We see families all the time where they're paying an extra $500, $1,000. I even came across a family a month ago that was paying about $3,000 per month to pay down their mortgage. Now, that particular family, they had just recently refinanced their mortgage. That mortgage was a 30-year fixed at 2.875%. I said, number one, how long are you going to be in the house? They told me probably about 7 years. I said, then I don't think it's a good strategy because you're going to have all this equity in the house while your high school junior and your 8th grader are in college. So paying extra principal, understand, you don't earn anything on that, right? Your house appreciates or sometimes depreciates at a rate of about 1 to 5%. Use whatever number you want to tell me. But you don't earn anything on home equity, right? Understand also that for a lot of people, when they're paying extra principal against the mortgage, they're actually cutting out some of the legs of what may be one of their greatest tax deductions. So just remember, just have that conversation. If you're not going to qualify for need-based aid, creating that liquidity, having that cash flow may make a heck of a lot more sense if you also have a goal of paying for your child's college education. Last concept is this. I call it the qualified plan problem. And this is, I ask the question, show of hands, how many of you have a pension, a true defined benefit pension plan? It used to be that everyone had a pension, right? You went and you worked for a company for 40 years. And when you retired, you got a gold pocket watch and you got a pension. And that pension was going to last for as long as you or your spouse lived, which back in the 30s, 40s, early 50s, as long as you lived meant approximately 8 years. But by the late 60s, early 70s, companies realized a couple of things. They realized, number one, most individuals are not working for us for 40 years. And number two, most individuals are living a lot longer. So Congress passed a law called Orisa, Employee Retirement Income Securities Act. You know it as your 401k, thrift savings plan, 403B, et cetera. And it said, instead of a defined benefit plan, Mr. and Mrs. Client, Mr. and Mrs. Employee, you're going to have a defined contribution plan. And you guys have all seen the stories. I mean, these companies sold this stuff to these people, right? They said, think about how much better off you're going to be. You can choose the investments. And, if you just earn 12% a year, look at how much more money you're going to have, right? We've all seen it as we've advised clients, and we're kind of getting away from it. But, here in the Washington, D.C. area, we're seeing federal employees that used to have the civil service plan, the defined benefit plan, and they elected to move to the federal employee retirement system, which was a defined contribution system. Well, let's say this is your situation. Let's say you're 47, right? Your client's going to work until they're 67. They're going to live until they're 90. They've got $100,000 in what I call old money. $10,000 is being deferred, $3,000 from the employer, and they're going to earn 8% on their money. So what's it grow to? I'm just going to fast forward through this just a little bit. At retirement, they've got about $1.1 million. Now, the good news is they're at the top of the mountain. They've got $1.1 million. And when we know exactly what rate of return they're going to earn and exactly when they're going to die, financial planning becomes pretty easy. We can do the math to say, okay, you're going to be able to pull out $97,493 per year from that 401k, IRA, et cetera. Okay. But what have they not done on that money? Well, if that's their only source of income, ignoring defined benefit pension plans, Social Security, rental income, other distributions, they're going to pay federal taxes in today's income tax brackets at 22%. You can see that number there. Most states are also going to levy a tax liability. Okay, so the average is about 6%. So for this family, their net income is a little over $70,000 per year. Now, the first time I saw this, I said, the reason that so many people put money into a 401k or other defined contribution plan, other than it's easy, and other than that my employer may make matching contributions, they say that I do it to save money on taxes. I look at this and say, we just paid $21,000 a year in federal taxes. Now, even if this was your client's exact same situation, okay, and let's say that they're in the 22% tax bracket today, right? That means that on a $10,000 deferral, they save $2,200 per year. They're going to do that for 20 years between 47 and 67. That means that they saved $44,000 on this money. My question I ask clients, how long does it take you to pay back every single dime that you saved over that 20-year period? And the answer is just over 2 years. And then they continue to pay it back for the next 23 years after that. My comment is this: money is not math, and math is not money. Most people know about the miracle of compound interest, but most people haven't considered what I call the nightmare of the compound tax. Really, really important that we as advisors are explaining this to clients, right? How do you make Uncle Sam your partner, right? What if you could save the same amount of money, but be able to pull it out tax-free? The bad news is that the Internal Revenue Service is a step ahead of us, right? There aren't a whole lot of vehicles that allow for tax-free distributions, but there are a few. Section 529 plans, Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, municipal bonds, and of course, cash value life insurance all allow for tax-free distributions. Most of those could be used for college or retirement. Obviously, a Section 529 plan sort of has to be used for college. The Roth 401k sort of has to be used for retirement. There are obviously some exceptions to those, but that's sort of what they're geared for, right? But it's important conversations to be having with our clients. I want to talk, and I know I'm right at the deadline here. I'm going to take 3 minutes and just run through sort of a quick case study comparing 529 plans and cash value life insurance. I said at the top of this presentation, Section 529 plans, a great product, not necessarily a great strategy. There's no guarantees. Market goes up, the market goes down. But compound interest is critical. We all know about the compound yield curve, right? But if you think about it, again, miracle of compound interest. Look at where the growth is. The growth of the yield curve is in the final third of this, right? It's not until you get out there in this example, years like 30 through 40, where most of the growth occurs on a compound yield curve. But with college, we start saving money, and just about the time that things start really turning for you, you're pulling that money out to send it off to the college or university. And we've got to start over. We send that money to the college or university, we never see it again. It makes an enormous difference. Think about all that you miss out on if your clients are thinking linearly about how they're going to plan, right? When you use 529 plans, you save and save and save and save. And just as things start to get going, you send the money off to the college or university, okay? So let's look at it in a real case study. So this is a case that I did a few years ago. It was a 40-year-old. I said, ultra preferred on the life insurance front. Aren't they all? I wish. Newborn child. We identified about $15,000 that was being used inefficiently. And he agreed, hey, I could put that towards something, right? Whatever that strategy may be. And I mapped out this strategy. Okay. I said, let's assume that you took the $15,000 and in years 1 through 10, we paid that $15,000 into a cash value whole life insurance policy. Okay. At the end of 10 years, you're done. You couldn't put more money into it, even if you wanted to. Well, from the get-go, that purchases a $370,000 death benefit. This policy also includes waiver of premium. So in the event that he gets disabled, it's a self-completing plan. In year 10, there's $156,000 of cash value. Now I pause right there. You put in $15,000 a year times 10 years. That's $150,000. You've got $156,000 to show for it. I am absolutely the first one to say that is not a real great return on investment. Okay, but here's the rest of the story. In years 11 through 18, what if you could then take that $15,000 that had been going into the cash value life insurance, and maybe you set that aside. You put it into a brokerage account. You put it into a 529 plan. Maybe you put it into a Roth IRA. Different things that you could do it. I realize that's above the contribution limit, but you get the idea. Okay, no contributions in those years. Worst case scenario in this illustration, in years 18 through 21, the years when the child is in college, this family can pull out tax-free a little over $54,000 per year. In my illustration, what I showed the client is you're never going to repay the loans. Obviously you could, but you're not required to. Okay, and then at life expectancy, there's a $377,000 tax-free death benefit. Let me pause there. $15,000 a year for 10 years that went into this thing, right? We put in $150,000. We pulled out roughly $217,000 tax-free to pay for college. Never repaid a dime of it. And then at age 85, we recaptured every single dime that was ever paid to the college or university outside of this policy. Think about how much better it can get if you do pay it back, be able to use it for college or retirement. Okay. The final analysis, things to think about, right? With Section 529 plans, when you spend the money, it's gone, right? You can't continue to earn. Once it's spent, it's gone forever, right? I had a family the other day. We were talking about some pretty expensive elite schools in the $75,000 a year range. Right? If you end up having to take out student loans, not only do you have to pay it back, but you pay it back with interest. With the life insurance strategy, it is a self-completing plan, right? Whether you die, whether you get disabled, whether the market is up or the market is down, you can get those guarantees with certain policies, obviously. And I get it that there's different things out there. Okay. And it's also the ability that, you know, you can pay for things that aren't covered by Section 529 plans. My good friend John Wheeler has this line, and I love it. He says, do you want to eat the chicken or do you want to eat the eggs? With the 529 plan, you're eating the chicken. You're eating that machine that continues to generate the income. And over time, you're going to eat the entire chicken. With the cash value life insurance, you're eating the eggs, right? It continues to lay eggs. Obviously, pros and cons to both, but I just want you to understand what it is, how it works, how we're positioning this with clients. Last thing I'll say is don't plan in a vacuum, right? Make sure you're planning comprehensively. Make sure you understand how the expected family contribution works and represent accurately what our products can and cannot do. So with that, I'll wrap it up. I apologize. I know I ran over. I'll turn it back over to Brian. If we've got time for any questions, that's great. If not, please feel free to reach out to me. Give me a call. That's probably the best way to reach me. If you want to send me an email, please do that as well. Probably my best email is bjolly, first initial last name, bjolly at vfwealth, as in Veritas Financial, vfwealth.com. I check that one a whole lot more frequently, but please feel free to reach out. Otherwise, thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions if they exist.
Brock, we're up against it. I will say Adam Sachs, obviously a good friend to NAFA, put in the chat that you're crushing it again. I agree. Great information, really valuable insight. And for everyone on this call, this session is recorded and will be available. So if you're interested in going back and pulling some of the slides, that information, because that was fantastic insight, it will be available at the Business Performance Center website at NAFA. We're going to take a very quick break. We'll be back at the top of the hour with retirement plan specialist Mark Massey from the Southern Medical Association. And we're going to take a deep dive into qualified plans within the healthcare industry. So quick break and we'll be back at the top of the hour. Thanks very much.